Okay. All right. So, hello, everybody. I'm Erica Lukes. You're here on Expanding Frontiers. You can go to expandingfrontiersresearch.org to check out the great work that my partner and I, Jack Brewer, do. We are really excited. We haven't done a show for a while, and tonight we're here with Toby Ball. And I've been following his work. I know Jack has for quite some time. And Toby has a very interesting background, which we're going to talk about a little bit more. But he is a panelist on the hit podcast Crime Writers On. And he also has done a podcast about UFOs. And Toby, I'm just going to bring you in, and I want you to give us a little bit more background. But sometimes reading this off just seems so impersonal, and you've got a long list. I noticed that you've got, with your books, the books that you've written, there's a lot here. So just start from the beginning.
Oh, okay. Well, it's nice to be here.
Thank you. Nice to be. I'm glad to have you.
Yeah. So I guess, to sort of focus on the podcasting stuff. I got into podcasting a little more than 10 years ago, right when Serial came out. And that I know was sort of the entry point for a lot of people into podcasting. And I had written 3 novels that were published in the early 2010s. So I was contacted by this guy, Kevin Flynn, and he and his wife and another woman named Laura Bricker were all true crime authors. And they had this idea of having sort of a podcast about Serial, but really focusing on sort of the storytelling aspects of it and research, and so having authors talk about the show. So we kind of did it as a way of, promoting our books, and we kind of hit it off, and we had like these weird little things that were useful. So Rebecca, who's our sort of host and producer, works at New Hampshire Public Radio. So she was playing it for some of the people at work, and they said, well, one thing is, like, none of you sound the same, right? So there's never any question about who's talking. So that's like the first hurdle to it. But we had just enough people listening, and we got along personally, that we kept doing it past the sort of 3 episodes that we'd been planning on doing. And then about a year later, there was sort of this confluence of shows that we reviewed, and we sort of made this jump to where it could suddenly become something we got paid for. We could have ads and things. And, so that was like 8 or 9 years ago. And that was kind of the beginning of, all right, I got to like start being somewhat professional about this, to a degree, as much as anybody is. So anyway, so Crime Writers On, we basically review true crime and, some, crime fiction, podcasts and TV shows, essentially. And, we've done, I think we're probably close to 700 shows now, something like that. And then with Patreon, I think we have like another 700 shows of just sort of, I like host a true crime book club, and other people on the show do other things. So that was kind of my introduction to podcasting. It's something I've done sort of consistently for more than a decade. But as far as sort of the UFO stuff, what happened was, after we'd been doing Crime Writers On for maybe 4 years, I thought, well, maybe I should work on a podcast. I should just make a podcast, probably just for, friends and family or whatever, but just so I got an idea of, what are the decisions that you have to make when you're making a podcast, and how do you just go about writing things? Because I was critiquing people without ever having actually done it myself. So I had it in my mind, and I can remember, sitting at a Starbucks. I had to go and get like this little piece of dental surgery, and I was early, so I was like drinking a coffee, and I was like, all right, what am I going to do this about? And I really wanted to do something about sort of belief and skepticism, and I was trying to find a entry point to it that people would actually want to listen to, besides me just kind of rambling. And and so I live in Durham, New Hampshire, which is where the University of New Hampshire is, and they had the Betty and Barney Hill papers, and I'll talk a lot more about Betty and Barney Hill later, I think. So I thought, well, maybe this is a good way of doing it. So I spent, a few months, and I was, doing the research. They had some audio stuff, getting some stuff off of YouTube and things like that. And I put together like sort of a rough cut of about 5 episodes of, taking a look at, like I said, sort of belief and skepticism around the Betty and Barney Hill abduction story. And like, why are people so, to this day, so, I think it's a great story, but some people think it's like probably really an alien abduction. Other people, I think rightly, think, well, even though I don't think anybody thinks Betty and Barney Hill were lying or making something up, but they probably misinterpreted things. And then is a longer story that's not all that interesting, but I sort of got introduced to Aaron Mahnke, who does the lore show, and he's like kind of a deal in the podcast world.
Love him. Yeah.
And he had an executive producer deal with iHeart, and he was looking for some shows, and so he listened to the rough cuts and was like, yeah, I'd be interested in bringing this on to iHeart. So once that happened, it was like the whole thing. They're like, well, we want 12 episodes, and but I had like actual producers who knew what they were doing. So I was really just sort of writing scripts and doing voiceover and collecting, archival audio stuff. But it also made me, I had to kind of expand the story. And so that was kind of the first time I really just had like a bunch of just information, right? And I was like, what does this all mean? Like, what kind of conclusions or themes can I get out of this that are going to be something other than, and then this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And so that ended up being really about sort of memory, and how memory works, and how memory it becomes corrupted over time, how regression hypnosis isn't like bringing back like some VCR footage in your brain of like what actually happened, but it's this sort of mix of memories and emotions and sort of external things that get brought into it. And then also about like how stories kind of grow, right? How it came, like this initial abduction story that Betty and Barney Hill told, like how that over the years, like different people would pick up sort of the bones of that story, but then have their own kind of spin on it. So like Betty Andreasen, who is very religious, her abduction story really was sort of this going to hell, then going to heaven, and having this sort of sacred book left with her. So those were kind of the two things, like in the final sort of product, which was season 1 of Strange Arrivals. Those were sort of the themes. And then when that was done, I got the email and said, hey, you want to do a second season? And I was like, okay. what is this going to be about, like belief and skepticism, or is it going to be about UFOs? And they're like, well, I think probably UFOs is more what people are going to be looking for after they listen to the first one. So, I can talk more about the rest of the season, or you want to talk about something else? I
love this. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I have a question. Let's, I don't want to bury the lead any further. I do want to come back to how it all evolved, but give us your news about what came of this Betty and Barney Hill series that you did.
Okay. So this is kind of cool timing to be doing, be meeting with you, because about, I guess now it's been about a month. So right after the first season came out, which is about 4 years ago, that season of Strange Arrivals got optioned for film by an Australian company called Seesaw. They've done a bunch of big movies. I can't remember them all right off the top of my head, but like this King's Speech, or if you watch Slow Horses on Apple.
Oh,
Yeah.
hey,
So
sorry. I just got really excited there because that is my favorite show.
yeah, it's awesome. So they optioned it, and for about 4 years, I've helped them, and I'll talk about some of the research I did for them. But about a month ago, the news release came out that they're going to make a movie, and the leads are going to be played by Coleman, Domingo, and Demi Moore, and the director is this guy Roger Ross Williams, who's he was a documentarian, but is now this will be his second sort of feature, fiction film, I guess. And he's just, really respected. So it's like, through no through no business of my own, it's got this like really sort of strong cast and strong people working on it and stuff. So it's going to be cool. It's been kind of fun watching the process and like helping out to a certain degree to this moment. But then, it'll be fun like going on set and watching how all that goes, and sort of learning how the business works, because I feel like I have some ideas, but it's also like kind of opaque. I was talking.
Sure.
I was driving around with the director, and a buddy of his came, and so I was taking him up through Franconia Notch, where which is where the Betty and Barney Hill's sort of main part of their sighting happened, and then we came down to Portsmouth and stuff, and he was just sort of talking about making films, and he was like, have you ever been on a set before? And I said no. He said, it's crazy, there's like 700 people like in this little like movie village, and some of the people are working on the movie, and then there's other people who are just like sort of supporting them, like making them sandwiches and taking care of the wardrobe and driving people around. So anyway, so I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, so that's sort of the big news in my neck of the woods.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm really psyched to see what they're going to do too. I mean, I've been in meetings with the main people involved, not the actors, but the people involved in writing the script, and they're very smart and insightful and experienced. So I'm psyched to see what they do with the story.
We are too. What a fun opportunity. And you've worked so hard, and you've met some amazing people, along the way. And I really admire that. I think that's fun. I can't wait to see. So when does it go into production then?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Yeah, I just know, it's all these steps. So I don't even know like what they haven't done to like start like nailing down when they're going to start, filming or doing their pre-production stuff. So they kind of let me know when I need to know. And occasionally I bug them and like, is there anything happening yet? And, like, no, we'll tell you when something happens.
It is going to be really fascinating to see where they go with this, because there's so many places, as you could go with the Betty and Barney Hill.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and one of the things that I think is kind of cool is that they're really, I think what really attracted them was Betty and Barney kind of themselves as people. And I think like I didn't do as good a job in the podcast, like kind of looking back on it. I wish I'd spent a little bit more time on who they actually were. Like I feel like you get a sense of their personality just because I had tape. And I'd actually, and I talked to, we had sort of across the years, like one mutual friend, and she would kind of talk to me about them, and I interviewed her a little bit. But they're just such an interesting couple, and in around here, and I found this out later, they're really largely known for their civil rights work, and in fact their papers at UNH, the original idea was sort of documenting their civil rights work. and it eventually became just sort of overwhelmed with UFO stuff. And there's a UFO festival that's about 10 miles away from here around Labor Day every year. And they say this just like this complete, for a university library special collections room, it becomes quite busy with people wanting to see the pictures. And there's Betty had this sort of bust made of what her memory of
Yes.
the alien was. So that's there, which is, super weird. It's got this hole in its head from where it fell off a podium one time, I think in Dayton or somewhere. So it's got like this hole in its head, and it's a little bit yellowed, which apparently is from all the cigarettes that Betty used to smoke. But she had it in her living room, on the mantle.
Well, it's a good conversation piece, I guess.
Yeah, it freaked out. I was talking to a woman who used to be babysat by Betty, and she said it used to really scare her. She was little. She like sort of run past the mantle when she was at their house.
Imagine the stories she has to share.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! Having your babysitter, if she turned out to be Betty Hill, that would be a trip. I've had some interesting babysitters, but not like that one.
Yeah, there's a what's funny is their house is just it's right by where my dentist is, and they lived in Portsmouth, which is 7 or 8 miles from where I live. They actually drove by my house on their way back, but my house hadn't been built yet. It was just like a field, but they drove on the road that goes right by my house. But their house is just, somebody bought it. It's a rental house. A friend of mine actually rented it for a couple of years and lived in it. It's like no marker or anything. It's pretty interesting.
Oh, I bet that is interesting. And so it is interesting, and Jack and I talk a lot or do research into obviously the people in the subject. And to me, it's been fascinating to learn about some of the political leanings or activism of people. Specifically right now, Jack and I are looking into James McDonald's wife, Betsy McDonald, who was a political activist. So that will be fascinating as we get more information, receive FOIA requests about her. But tell us a little bit about Betty and Barney Hill, because some of these things, as you know, people get so caught up in the UFO abduction side of things that they're leaving out a really whole important part of a story of a person.
Yeah. And it's, one of the things when I was looking at sort of representations of Betty and Barney in sort of popular culture, that's one of the things that people don't really pay attention to. And as a matter of fact, I can't remember what it's called, maybe Dark Skies or something. There was a sort of a fictional sort of Project Blue Book type show that was on, and they have a investigator coming in and talking to them, and Barney says, I'm a black man in New Hampshire. I don't want to bring attention on myself. And the reality is it was kind of the opposite. It's not that as though he was seeking publicity, but he was out there doing civil rights stuff, fairly early on. So he was a mailman, and he had to drive down to South Boston from Portsmouth, which like now is probably an hour and a quarter. I can't imagine what it was like back in like the late 1950s. He must have been driving a couple hours each way to go to South Boston, which was not noted for its sort of racial understanding. And Betty was a social worker, and they became, so Barney, I think he ended up being maybe vice president of the local NAACP chapter, but he was also founded and I think was president of the Rockingham Action Committee, I think was what it was called. And that's sort of the county that Portsmouth, and I think it's the most populous county in New Hampshire. and there was a sort of a local group that was centered around the Unitarian Universalist Church, that was also doing civil rights stuff. So things that that he did, or people he was associated with. There was a thing about barbers who weren't willing to cut black men's hair. There's and it's still open now, a big sort of grand hotel, like that's right on the ocean, that wouldn't serve black people. And they set up this situation where they had a black couple come and were denied a seat. And then these two very prominent people in the Seacoast showed up wanting a table for four, and we're going to be seated, and brought the two black couple with them to sort of make a point about how that worked. Some of the stuff is head shaking. So I was doing a bunch of research for the filmmakers about the sort of civil rights stuff they were doing. There was actually a minstrel show that was being held in a town around here, like I think in like 63 or 64. And there were notices in the paper of Barney being involved in sort of a community conversation about like why minstrel shows were sort of not kosher.
Wow.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah. I was working. It's a cool organization in New Hampshire called the Black History Trail of New Hampshire, that's centered in Portsmouth, and it's really documenting Black history since colonial days. And so they've done a lot of work archiving all this stuff. So I was going through their stuff to give credit where it's due. Another kind of interesting thing that I found when I was going through the papers is this series of days where Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And then the next day, Barney was giving a talk about being abducted by aliens at a middle school in the town next door. And then the following day, he was a speaker at this sort of memorial rally in the center of Portsmouth, talking about the work that Dr. King had done. And I was just like, what a crazy situation, right? It's like this thing has happened to the most prominent person for the work that you are really dedicating a big part of your life to. And then within 24 hours, you're talking to a group of people about how you might have been abducted by aliens. And, it's just, I mean, just by given where we are, it's just largely, if not all, white crowd. And then the next day you're up, like, again, talking about this very serious sort of weighty stuff.
In your opinion, Toby, do you think that UFO historians are not aware of this, or that they tend to not address the civil rights aspects of Barney Hill?
I feel that's a good question. I don't know for sure. Like I haven't tried to talk to anybody about that specific thing. It's not hard to find out about. Like if you go to UNH and you go into their archives, like you'll find that stuff. I mean, it may not be immediately apparent like how sort of prominent he was, and people may say, well, he's a black guy living in a mostly white area, of course he was going to be doing something. But the fact that he was actually sort of a leader, and Betty was too. I mean, Betty was also very, very involved. She was on a couple of those committees that I talked about before. She was the Unitarian Universalist Church of Portsmouth, like envoy to the United Nations. Is some, I couldn't quite wrap my head around exactly what that meant. But she was also very active in the civil rights stuff. Yeah. So I don't know if it's just kind of, that seems to distract from like the UFO thing that people are mostly interested in. But I think that was something that the film people were definitely interested in. It's like, these are actual people whose lives were just like, regardless of what you think happened, their lives were disrupted and changed, right? And what does that mean? And particularly, for somebody who's is sort of out there in front of the public as Barney and also Betty were. Um, the other thing that's kind of interesting about that time is there was a Air Force base in Portsmouth that has since closed. So when I took the director Roger and working with the Black History Trail people, we pulled together some people who knew Betty and Barney from back in the day, and we're talking to them about them as people and civil rights work and stuff. And they were like, yeah, there was like more of a Black population back in the 50s and 60s when the Air Force base was around. And then when that closed, it went back to being uh, pretty white.
It was peace, right? Peace.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
And so do you think, so with the UFO abduction stuff, who was the prominent person that came into their life that kind of shaped their opinion or moved their opinion towards the fact that they were abducted? How did that play out for people that don't really know the meat and bones of Betty and Barney Hill?
So, yeah, so what's kind of interesting about it is, so there's a few things that kind of happen. And one is so they go on this, they're driving back from Montreal. They think they see a UFO. They show up back at their house later than they think they should. And so they're unsettled. And over the next couple of weeks, Betty has these very vivid dreams. I think there might be 5 of them. And she writes them down. She's like, she didn't dream them in order, but then she kind of puts them in order and she writes them down in this document that's called Dreams or Recall. And it's basically the story that we get now, right? So she's already written out this thing that she dreamt. And they kind of talk to different people. They talk to some people at Pease. Betty's sister was sort of into UFOs, apparently. I didn't jump into that too much, but and then a guy named Walter Webb comes from NICAP and sort of questions them and talks to them about it. But the real sort of the big moment for them is Barney. Barney suffered from some mental health problems. He'd been, I don't think he'd been in sort of a life-threatening injury, but his teeth got blown out by a grenade. He had false teeth, which becomes part of the story. And he was estranged from his kids from his first marriage. And, I think there was, even though this was not like I don't think there's a lot of racial violence up here, but there were minstrel shows, right? So I think there was also a fair amount of stress of being out front in civil rights kind of things. So anyway, the therapist he was saying said that you might benefit from, being from hypnotherapy. And there was a guy down in Boston whose name is going to escape me until we're done talking, and then it'll come back to me.
Dr. Simon.
Dr. Simon, exactly. Benjamin Simon, who'd worked with returning soldiers who were suffering from what we now know as PTSD. So they go down to Boston and they get hypnotized separately. And Betty, under regression hypnosis, tells essentially the story that she had written down in this Dreams or Recall document before. And then Barney tells this much vaguer story about like Betty has this whole story about she's brought on, she's having conversations with people, they're asking her things, she's being kind of feisty, they show her a star map, they show her a book, you know, all these things. Barney is just like, I had my eyes closed, I was praying, I was freaking out, I like opened my eyes one time and saw this like being like with his face right there, and I like, you know, closed my eyes again and kept praying. And so it's, you know, to me, it seemed like Betty had these dreams. She kind of felt that one of her friends said, are those dreams, or are you just sort of remembering things while you're asleep? And I think that kind of brought that into her mind. And it seemed as though Barney, having heard this story or read the that little dreams or recall piece, was sort of, you know, putting himself in that story, right, to the degree that he could, and sort of what would I have been doing in that situation? Like that's kind of my interpretation. I don't know. There's certainly not an accepted thing that's out there, but that was kind of what I got out of it. So they do this. It gets leaked. The story that they told under regression hypnosis, it gets run in a newspaper. And at that point they say, you know, we got to take control of the story. We wanted to keep it quiet, but now that it's out there, rather than just let anybody run around with it, we'll take control of it. And that's when they, God, I'm forgetting all these names now. But they got in touch with a journalist who had previously done a story about a UFO sighting in Exeter several years
prior. His name? I was looking up him today, so I got you covered there. Fuller. Yeah,
that's right, John Fuller. And so they get in touch with him, and he sort of writes the, you know, official account called A Journey Interrupted, which has actually just gotten put out in a new edition in the past couple years. So that's what really there was an article in Look magazine that he wrote, and then they put out a book, and that's when they became sort of well known as, you know, celebrities to an extent. And Barney was on Whose Line Is It Anyway, I think, or
that's right.
And Betty was on that F. Lee Bailey show, like Lie Detector or something, where, you know, he like hooked her up, and, you know, she told the story and he could tell whether she was lying or not. But, you know, I think it's a classic, like, if you believe it, it's not a lie. You know, I think, I don't think nobody I've talked to who's known them said anything other than they 100% believe that it had happened, and they were stand-up people, right? They're not the type of people who would make something up like that for attention or whatever. So I think it's pretty clear that they were 100% believed that it had happened to them. And, you know, I guess depending on what your kind of take on it is, they either misinterpreted stuff, something happened to them that they're sort of processed in that way, or maybe they were abducted by aliens. So,
well, I mean, it's interesting because you see, you know, you hear about, you know, obviously Walter Webb or her sister that is, you know, has an interest in UFOs, and then, you know, having people around you that can potentially seed ideas, you know, into your consciousness. And I've noticed that a lot in the UFO world. It's like somebody has an anomalous experience, and then you're with a group of people, and before you know it, you think you've been abducted by, or you've been through like a jump room and you're going to Mars, or, you know, all of these things. And so it is fascinating to see how people that are just looking for explanations for things that were traumatic, you know, are kind of led down a path, or could potentially be led down a path where they're creating, as you mentioned at the beginning of the show, they're putting things together and creating kind of a narrative of things.
Yeah, and I think that especially, you know, and I don't know if they were conscious of that dynamic at the time, although I think they might have been, but like sort of the Bud Hopkins, John Mack stuff, that seems exactly like kind of what they were doing, right? David Jacobs
Right.
was taking people who had these things that they didn't understand or couldn't explain or whatever, and be like, oh yeah, well, this is what it was, let me read my book, then I'll hypnotize you, you can tell me about it. And surprisingly, they got the story they wanted.
One of the reasons I asked you that question, Toby, about it, in your opinion, do you think that UFO people tend to kind of cherry pick what they focus on in a story, is because our research, Erica and me that do Expanding Frontiers, we just find repeated circumstances of finding information that's not particularly supportive of well-known narratives and the reputations or the work ethic of like some of the people you're mentioning there. And then there's kind of sacred cows somewhat, like, there's J. Allen Hynek or Betty Hill that in my opinion, we sometimes see work suppressed maybe, or perhaps just other work elevated more that's flattering of them. Where, for instance, in Erica's archive, and we published it at EFR, we have a letter that Betty Hill wrote to, now I'm going to pull the name thing, Ann Druffel. And she is telling Anne how disappointed she is in alien abduction researchers, and that I'm paraphrasing, but that it's ridiculous, and that she's seen them, a neighbor. She said, if I told you this man's name, you'd recognize it. A man that insisted to my neighbor that he hypnotize her. She kept saying she'd never even seen a UFO, but he was persistent. And over the course of days while he was visiting, she finally agreed and told him a abduction story, in her neighbor's words, per Betty Hill, to get rid of him, to get him, just leave me alone. There's your alien abduction story. And other than Ms. Druffel and Erica sharing that with me, I've never even heard that described anywhere else. Like that's just the kind, it's like a partisan approach that you're either pro UFO and alien abduction or you're not. So you, instead of, and that's what I appreciate about your careful, systematic work of, let's just get it all on the table here and see if what pieces fit where, let's see what we get here.
That's an interesting story. I mean, it sounds a lot like how false confessions come out in police questionings, right? Is you just wear people down and you wear people down. They're like, all right, I did it, at 3 o'clock in the morning after you haven't eaten for 18 hours or something. It seems like it's a similar kind of dynamic. I mean, I will say about my podcast is that, I was really relying on people like you who are doing the actual research, and are doing sort of the original work. And I felt like I was like, really what I was doing was trying to synthesize things, and find like thematic things that could maybe show like sort of pathways along, to try and help understand these, some of the dynamics that are going on. But again, it was taking stuff that people like you are sort of doing in the field. And the imposter syndrome was strong throughout the whole experience, but I tried to stay in my lane and rely on people who I who, you know, I kind of felt were doing good work and had good insight, and then trying to stitch these things together.
Well, thank you. That's generous and gracious of you. And I do want to come back to how your work evolved. But before I get too far from that Betty Hill letter to Ann Druffel, I want to ask you, Erica, what are your thoughts on this partisanship with documents like that? And do you have any thoughts you'd like to share on that letter?
I mean, I think the letter is fascinating, and I mean, there's so many things that, to me, when, you know, Jack, you've mentioned kind of the archiving and the cherry picking of specific things, and Toby, that's why I like what you do, kind of threading everything together and painting a whole picture instead of just a very limited picture, which that's what the UFO world is. The holy cow, you know, syndrome is the holy cow. Excuse me, that used to be a club I used to sing at, so I just went there. But the sacred cow thing is real, and that's unfortunate because so many of these people have real depth, and they've contributed so much to society, like the Hills have with, you know, the civil rights movement, and it paints a picture that some UFO archivists want to completely omit because they're so bound and determined to prove that UFOs are real that they will completely, you know, take out sections of research where people are known to be racist or known to be sexual predators or known to be really despicable characters. And I think that that's a real shortcoming in the UFO world and in the UFO archiving and historical world, to be quite honest. But that's where I had to go with that one, Jack.
Sure, and that ties back into what Toby was talking about. The way I actually met Toby was a few years ago when he was working on a series he did that was high quality, well produced podcasts on alleged alien abduction, and it involved Rainey and Emma Woods. And he got in touch with some of us that had documented circumstances around it. And the people he was working with had an affiliate at a recording studio in Orlando that I went there to record in a room because it wasn't just the sound quality, it was also that you record locally while he's also recording. And it was, to the things I had been used to at that point, a pretty high level operation. And it sounds like it. When you listen to his material, it sounds like you're listening to like something on public radio, like a really well-produced background music. You know, it's a well-produced podcast. And that's how I met him, was we were discussing the Emma Woods case. And please go ahead and continue with how your interest in Betty Hill and that the UFO thing you had said earlier seemed to really tie into memory and what people identify as memory and how they integrate these memories. And tell us more about how that evolved, please, Toby.
Sure. So, you know, when they said, do you want to do a second season, and I said, yeah, like, of course. But I didn't really have a thought about where I wanted to go with it. And Aaron actually mentioned Rendlesham to me, which I didn't really know anything about, which is a very interesting case that I think a lot is made out of. Oh, Erica. Oh, she's back. A lot of people make a lot out of it. I think it's fairly easily debunked or explained, but there's like a bunch of different aspects to that explanation, which makes it kind of interesting. But so to me, I ended up talking to this guy, David Clark, who is a folklorist in England. And, he was talking about how when, there's no settled explanation for something, that's where folklore kind of can take hold. Right. And so I was like, like that's an interesting sort of observation or insight. And I really started, I said, okay, how does this work? Like, how can this explain more of like what we know? And then so my question was like, why does my mom know what Area 51 is? Right. She's not, she's educated. She listens to my podcast, but she's not like a UFO person, but it's just so ubiquitous in our culture. And what I really, really wanted to do is there's this great, like Obama was on, I think it was Jimmy Kimmel. And Jimmy Kimmel's like, he's like, what's going on with Area 51? Jimmy Kimmel says, if it was me, if I was president right after I got sworn in, I'd be like, I'll be right back. And I'd run into the Oval Office and I'd call up the people I had to call and be like, what's the deal? Are there aliens? And Obama's like, well, that's another reason why you'll never be president. And
that was funny. I remember that.
But it's just like, but everybody knows the joke, right? So it's like, how did we get from 1947, Kenneth Arnold and Roswell and stuff, to where we are now with like what people sort of think about UFOs, given that there's, there hasn't been like a single effort that's been trying to create this. It's not like Pokemon cards or something where you've got this central thing that's trying to make this. So that became sort of the theme of the second season, was really looking at sort of the US government effort, effort in quotes, to get on top of what was going on. So it was Project Grudge and Project Sign and Project Blue Book and the Robertson Commission, et cetera, et cetera. And how, like, at these different steps, they would come out with these statements, and then there'd be these critiques of these statements, and there's these different, stories like Lonnie Zamora or the swamp gas stuff in Michigan, where, because like the public isn't given like this is the explanation for it, it's like, oh well, maybe it is UFOs because nobody's told me it's not. And just sort of following that and seeing like, so this is how modern folklore is created, right? And that UFOs are sort of this 80-year folklore arc, basically from 1947 till now. And what are the dynamics there, and what are sort of the important points in that journey to get from there to where we are now? So that was interesting. I mean, I think I talked to some folklorists and, a bunch of people who had sort of knowledge about these different cases. And there's some pretty good archival footage. Do you guys know, oh God, what's it called? Something discs. This woman in New Mexico, I think, had put together on archive.org, like these sort of collections of archival audio.
I think I know what you're talking about, and I can't remember her name.
Yeah. So anyway, she was very generous in letting us use some of the stuff that she had. So I got done with that season, and they re-upped for a third season, and this is where I ended up talking to Jack, and my thought going into that one is, it felt as though whoever was doing the research on these things, like the outcomes of their research tended to be very, very consistent and different than other people. And I think the most obvious place for that, because they're all basically starting from the same point and just reaching different conclusions, were the Jacobs, Hopkins, and Mack. abduction stuff. So I started looking at the Zimbabwe sighting with the school children, and how there was like a certain story that came out, and then John Mack showed up and was interviewing all these kids and stuff, and then suddenly there was like, oh, they left us this message about preserving the earth and taking care of the earth and not harming the earth. It's like, well, that sort of dovetails with a lot of John Mack's sort of like personal interests and political and sort of spiritual views. And then I kind of go from there to the John Mack and Dave Jacobs and Bud Hopkins. And that I'd actually talked to Carol Rainey for the first season, because there was just a little bit about Bud Hopkins at the end, was sort of like the end point of the whole alien abduction like saga of like continuing one-upsmanships of the stories, until finally it's like millions of people are being abducted and they don't remember it, but we can figure it out with this survey that we give to them. And just sort of bizarre stuff. So I interviewed her, and she was just a great interview. I could have talked to her for 6 hours. Just really interesting woman. Had a lot of sort of charisma, just talking to her, and sort of her insight as being somebody who was completely immersed in it was just really interesting. It's just some of the things she talked about how, Jacobs and Hopkins, when Mac kind of sort of joined them, and they were really excited because they're like, okay, this guy's like a scientist, and he's going to bring us this scientific rigor and prestige and stuff. And she said that she had been talking to John Mack. I think they were all on Cape Cod or Martha's Vineyard or somewhere, and she kind of mentioned that to him, and John Mack's like, I don't care about that stuff. He's like, I'm concerned about the message. I'm concerned about the spiritual, like, new age kind of stuff. So it was taking a look at, starting from this premise that all these people are being abducted, almost nobody remembers it, and then going from there, and they just go into these three completely, the end games are just completely different. And it's not like John Mack is getting a third of the people who thinks they're like crazy aliens that are going to try and take us over, and then like a third are just like these technocrats who can't like nurture their hybrid babies, and then a third are like these these sort of new agey demigods. They're all the new agey ones, and all of David Jacobs' ones are all they're all hybrids who are want to invade the earth or beat up Dave Jacobs, so he has to go to his vacation to escape. And so it just that seemed like the most sort of the easiest one to show. It's just so clear. And then you kind of add to that, and this is like the one place where sort of the UFO stuff that I was doing, and then the sort of true crime stuff that I was looking at sort of comes together in the David Jacobs story, which it's disturbing. And are people who listen to this, are they going to know all about the Emma Woods story?
Our crowd would, but it would be just in case there are new people, which we're trying to, push to the show.
Okay.
Like background on her would be fabulous.
Sure. So just real quickly, and Jack, jump in if I get any of this stuff wrong. But Emma Woods is a pseudonym for a woman who lived in New Zealand, who had some experiences that she couldn't explain. She was seeing a therapist. She wasn't satisfied with the way he was kind of interpreting what was going on, or the advice she was getting from him. She went to see somebody else. I can't remember who it was, but who suggested getting in touch with I think it was just David Jacobs, but it might have been, was it John Mack and then he referred her, or was it David Jacobs?
I think she got referred right to Jacobs.
Yeah.
I recall Leah Haley got sent to Bud Hopkins, who referred her to John Carpenter.
Okay.
But I think Emma Woods got sent right to Hopkins, and I recall her explaining to me that he told her the only way we can know for sure is for you to be hypnotized. Yeah. And then I'm sorry. Yeah, I think she was referred to Hopkins, who told her that. And Emma was referred to Hopkins, who told her that, and she did a questionnaire, and then somehow also ended up with Jacobs. I'd have to go through to see exactly, but yeah, she ended up with Jacobs.
Yeah, I mean, that's the important part of it. And so Jacobs is I don't think he was a full professor, but he taught history at Temple University, which is in Philadelphia. So he was doing regression hypnosis with her over the phone, for hours at a time. And he was also taping these sessions, and for reasons that I honestly can't wrap my head around, gave her the tapes of it, even though they just do not reflect well on him at all. But in the course of this, he was doing things like asking her to send him like unwashed panties and sending her a chastity belt, with the idea being that he was telling her that she was being sexually assaulted by aliens and hybrids, and just all this sort of weird. I just don't know. I mean, it feels kind of like rape fantasy stuff. But regardless, so this goes on for a long time before Emma kind of realizes what exactly the dynamic that's happening, and starts to pull out of it. She asks him to send him tapes. I don't know if he sent all of them or some of them, but she ended up getting these tapes and being able to hear them. And it was just like, I mean, she's in a hypnotic state, and he's basically feeding her sort of information about stuff that he is saying is happening to her, stuff that he says he's heard about from other women that he's working with. But it's all this very sexually violent stuff. I mean, it's really kind of upsetting. I mean, it's not kind of upsetting, it's extremely upsetting. And then there's also this weird sort of narrative that goes through this, where there are these hybrids who are going, and I'm not going to remember all the details of this, but there's this other woman who he was working with, and like these hybrids would like take control of her computer and write these things. And, he was worried that they were going to come after him. And so he had to escape. And so he went to his vacation place in Massachusetts to escape from the hybrids who are after him. So, it's just this weird mix of like made up adventure alien stuff and this really unpleasant, upsetting sexual violence stuff. And this is all happening while she's, under hypnosis, and it is extremely suggestible. And so she eventually extricates herself from this. But, one of the things she said that kind of really stuck with me, I may end one of the episodes with it, is she says, I have these memories and I'm just not sure which ones are real. Right. I mean, I know that some of these are false memories, but it's hard to kind of sort it out. So anyway, she, she complained to Temple because he was sort of using his university affiliation as sort of bona fides for doing this stuff, and Temple,
use their forms to have her
yeah.
sign waivers. Yeah.
And look, I've worked at a couple of universities, and I've been trained in like the human subjects protocols and stuff, and like none of this stuff is kosher. Like there's no way that any of this stuff would have been allowed to happen at either of the universities I worked at. He tried. There is this sort of oral history thing, which is sort of a exception to human subject stuff. And I think he was trying to make the case that this was oral history gathering, which it just transparently was not. So anyway, that's sort of a not very well organized sort of capsule of that story.
That's a good summary. The challenging thing about trying to summarize the Emma Woods, David Jacobs debacle succinctly is that there is an incredible amount of shocking material. There really is. Toby's description was on the nose, and I've seen a lot of apologists try to argue certain points, like they've tried to argue the request under hypnosis for underwear and told her not to remember it was that he wanted to do testing and that he didn't want the hybrids to know. Yet, as Emma has aptly pointed out, then why didn't he just ask for a cotton swab sample or something?
Well, even that would have been absolutely off the wall and wrong. And it's shameful that his university didn't take action.
And it has nothing to do with oral history collection. Right.
Right. And I too, sorry to interrupt you, Jack, but I think it is important that I think pretty much everybody that I know in the UFO subject, I mean, they're still, friends with him. Nobody has distanced themselves from him over this. And to me, I just find that quite telling about the character of people involved.
That was a big part of it too. And under hypnosis, he suggested to her to tell people that she was suffering from multiple personality disorder. It's absolutely insane. It's somewhat neurotic, bordering on psychotic, to even understand the narrative. Like, he had started with Emma and this entourage of women that he was doing these interactions with. He had started using codes and wanted them to write him emails in codes and not use his real name. And there are a lot of very disturbing implications of it, indeed. Yes. And so your description was adequate, Toby, for something that is just mind-numbingly, excessively inappropriate. Yeah.
So if there's one person that has made a complaint, that there are probably other people that have made complaints about his behavior over the years. And that's unfortunate. I just wanted to say really quickly while I'm thinking about this, I was going through the archive yesterday, and the archive that we have here at EFR, we have a lot of abduction research, and everyone that Ann Dreffel knew who was involved in the topic of abductions and hypnosis, she has all of the questionnaires that were given, including one that was written by David Jacobs and Bud Hopkins. And so if anybody ever needs anything, I've got a lot of these surveys, abduction surveys written by the top people. So,
Wow. That's so interesting. Have you,
yeah, it's
I
fascinating.
assume you've read the, read that proceedings of that MIT conference, the alien abduction conference at MIT.
It's been a while, but I have, yeah.
So there was only one copy in New Hampshire, so I had to drive up to this this university and sort of north of where I am. And there is some really great stuff in the like the actual presentation. The papers are like and then but you get to like the comments that they received like after giving their presentations, and they're just absolutely incredible. Like these actual social scientists are like if you knew how to actually write a survey, there might have been some interesting stuff there, but there's nothing we can get out of this because it's not a valid survey construction. Like there's just no way to draw any conclusions from what you've done. Yeah, it's so the other thing about this whole David Jacobs, Emma Woods thing. So I reached out to David Jacobs several times. I had no expectation that he would talk to me, and he just didn't even bother getting back to me. So I went to his website where he has this sort of I don't think it's still up anymore, but he had this sort of explanation, and it all takes place. His explanation takes place in the fantasy world that he was creating. Like it's all about alien hybrids being after him and stuff. So he's like fully committed to the bit, right? Like he's not willing to like take a step back and say, look, this is what I was trying to do. You know, there's like this legitimate reason why I was telling these stories or whatever. No, it's like, there are these hybrids and they were going to mess me up. So I had to get out of there. Like, what was I supposed to do? And, so, you know, not having talked to him, I took that stuff and I contextualized it and I put it in kind of verbatim. Like this is what he has published, as a sort of defense. So I included it in there, but to me, it was just,
Yeah.
himself,
That was one of the crazy parts of it. I had blogged about it and wrote a book about it and done a number of interviews, and several people had spoken out about this. You interviewed a number of them. Eric has spoken to many of them, including Emma. And one of the things that always had me just beating my head against the wall, Toby, was I'd get on someone's podcast and they'd say, well, okay, so allegedly, blah, blah. And I'd go, no, not, he doesn't deny it. He just says that it was justified.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, legend about it. He'll say, "Yeah, I did that. I was trying to shake the crazy hybrids." Yeah,
and it's like you have to, like, he's asking you to accept his weird sort of fantasy world, and that's like the given, and then you get the explanation, but you have to accept that for it to make any sense. It is one of the stranger things I have read, just given sort of what the stakes were for him and sort of the backstory. And it's so absurd that you have to kind of bring yourself back to the fact that it's the response to something that was very, very serious, right? And it's sort of this absurd response, this really sort of unpleasant stuff that he was doing.
And he got away with it.
Yeah, apparently. It's crazy. I mean, I can see, what's funny is, again, having worked at a couple of fairly big universities, like there was a guy at one of the universities I worked at who like absolutely believed that there are reptilians walking amongst us, right? I mean, that was, he was a UFO conspiracist, but that was just way outside of what he was actually doing. And so I think it was just like one of those things where it's like, okay, well, he's weird, but he, you know, he brings in all this grant money and he does this other stuff, and that's good scholarship. And I don't know if that was the same idea behind with Temple and David Jacobs. And then they're like, oh man, like, why is he doing this stuff on our letterhead? Like, why can't he just like, and just kind of hoping it would go away, and, you know, not thinking there was like a constituency that was really going to punish them for sort of poo-pooing it and just trying to ignore it. And if that was the case, I mean, they were proven to be right, unfortunately.
I do like to think that Emma having the courage to speak out the way she did, Carol having the courage to support Emma, and then the people, minority, like you're saying, Erica, that they were, that rallied around Emma and Carol. I feel confident that that's not the way Jacobs was hoping his career would end. He retired, quote unquote, from Temple shortly after Emma had made the complaints that she did. And I mean, let's be realistic here. It certainly didn't help his relationship with his employer, you know.
No. Yeah. I would, do you think that like the sort of the maleness of the UFO sort of subculture plays a part in this? I mean, I just wonder if there was sort of a larger sort of female presence, whether that would have helped.
You know, it's so hard having had the experiences that I've had, you know, with MUFON and with different people in the subject. It's been extremely difficult as a woman to try to get things, or to even with my archive. I mean, I've had to fight tooth and nail to get the things that I have and earn trust with people, and watch some of these males try to sweep in and take things away that were, you know, meant to be here. And it's been a real interesting experience. I know that when there was a certain things that were happening with sexual harassment, and I went to other women in the subject to say, hey, this is what's happening. I'm not the first person this has happened to. This is happening. This is a pattern with this person. What are we going to do? And I was told by one of the females who's very well known in the subject that we're not going to talk about this. This is all about love and light, and it's only positive, so don't bring it up again. And so it was not only the women. I mean, it was a combination of both. And I think that's really unfortunate, because there are good people that come into this subject that are just looking for answers. They're looking for a community. They might have had experiences, whatever they are, and they get met with people that are right there to take advantage of them. And there is some real predatory behavior as a result of people not standing up. And it's so easy to dismiss too, because it's UFOs. These people are crazy to begin with. So, you know, it's you can just cast people off.
Yeah. I mean, I had, do you know Karen Stalls-Now from Monster Talk?
No.
No, I'm familiar with the show.
Yeah. So it's her and Blake Smith, and Karen. I had her just to talk briefly about the whole thing. Yeah, the number of, I don't know if subculture is the right word, but a number of like groups where like misogyny is just like this really malign presence. It's enraging, and I think it stifles these groups. You know, I mean, I think it's a barrier to entry for people who are either women who want to be involved in it, or men who don't want to be in a place that is misogynist, and for things that like UFOs, you wouldn't, doesn't feel like it needs to be like a place like that. I mean, there's no reason why men would have primacy on a subject. So anyway, that was just like another thing that I was kind of, with the whole Emma Woods things, it did kind of feel, that she's in this situation where it's just a lot of men, and trying to get your, it's not like she was trying to get justice or retribution or whatever, but just even to be heard when that like this large percentage of people are going to just dismiss you purely for gender reasons, right? And
yeah, it certainly factors. There were a number of websites that banned Emma and Carol Rainey from participating in discussions about Emma and Carol Rainey. One of the worst, that the misogyny was just rampant, was at that time we used e-lists, and there was one called UFO updates list that was just shameful, the extent that they wanted to stand up for the system that was in place, and many of them were confident and secure with this white men's club that had it all figured out, had control of the genre, and they were banned from participating in discussions on that e-list. It was very unfortunate, and that certainly factored. And I think that Emma and Carol both did invaluable work in cracking that armor. Yeah.
Well, are any of those e-lists still available? Could you find them publicly?
Oh, yeah. At the time that I wrote the book, I linked to some of the examples, and that's the e-list that Isaac Coey took over, that he now runs as the UFO Collective, is a Google group. But I'm pretty sure it's archived, or it's on Wayback Machine, the Internet Archive. And I linked to quite a bit of it in my book. And Peter Brooksmith had pointed out in one of his messages that it was just inexcusable. I forget the exact terminology he used, but the way they were treated on UFO updates lists was just inexcusable, just completely inappropriate.
Well, thanks both of you for actually addressing that. I appreciate that too. That's a really important topic that we don't talk about a lot, and I think it does prohibit a lot of women from getting involved in the subject, or men. I mean, it's a turn off for a lot of people, for sure. But Toby, let's talk a little bit about season 3.
Oh, yeah. So that all this stuff sort of happened in season 3 as it was sort of, and then, gosh, it's been a while. I think it ends. It's kind of interesting that the whole, the whole run, at least so far, of the 3 seasons, ended up with, after this, talking about John Keel, who I don't think is really like part of modern UFO stuff, but his book, The Eighth Castle, I think that's what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
It's this really weird and interesting book, but he basically, like, he has this theory that he puts out that it's one of those things where, there's other vibrations that things that vibrate in ways that we can't perceive. And then every once in a while, one of them will kind of break through into our world. And then the person who experiences that, like, it will appear to him or her in the form that they're expecting, so that all these sort of anomalous creatures like werewolves or fairies or UFO people or whatever are all sort of from the same thing, but they take on the appearance that's expected by the person. And the only reason why I kind of went into this is that David Clark, again, this folklorist from England, talked to John Keel, and Keel was like, "Oh, that was just one big metaphor. Like, that book was just a metaphor." And I was like, that's it, man. You got it, right? It's just like, people see what they want to see, right? It's like when something weird happens, it's like you interpret it the way that, from this sort of your vantage point. And so I hadn't read the book until I heard the story from David, and that was when I was like, oh, like, this seems like this is a promising avenue to go down. And so I read the book, and it's nuts. My son likes to read really weird books, and I gave it to him. He's like, "This is one of the best books I've ever read."
I think it's the Eighth Tower, right?
Eighth Tower. That's it. Yeah. So
maybe I'll get that out tonight and read it.
Yeah, I mean, if you like, once you know that it's a metaphor, it's like you're just like, wow, this guy, this is really good stuff. So anyway, that was kind of where things ended. And, I wasn't really sure, like, that nobody was like, do you want to do a fourth season? And I didn't push it, because I just didn't know, like, I didn't have in my mind, like, what else. I didn't want to just do another season to do another season. Like, if there was something that I felt like I could offer that was new or interesting, I probably would have pushed on it. And I'm sure there's other stuff out there, but I didn't have anything in mind at the time. And so I ended up doing a history podcast. And I'm in the middle of doing a second season of that podcast, which is called Rip Current. And yeah, so that's kind of how that all kind of ended up playing out. I've actually, it's funny, I probably should have mentioned this when we were emailing back and forth. I just started doing a new sort of talkie podcast with a journalist from LA. And it's called More Like Ancient Aliens. And we go through it. We watch an Ancient Aliens episode, and then we spend 40 minutes talking about it, sort of a combination of, joking about the weird ancient alien stuff, but then also trying to talk about, like, the actual history that sort of undergirds the stuff, because it's often actually pretty interesting stuff that they're talking about. It just doesn't have anything to do with aliens. And
yeah, I've seen your social media posts about that and been meaning to check it out. Yeah.
I mean, we're sort of, we did several that were behind a paywall, and then we decided we were going to continue doing it. And we get guests on, and sometimes, the conversations kind of veer off into other things, but aliens in the Civil War, it's like, it's hard to resist. It's just so aliens. Did aliens help Abraham Lincoln write the first draft of the Emancipation Proclamation? It could
I'm
be.
sure of it.
Oh, well, I mean, in full disclosure, I've been on Ancient Aliens, so I'll just say,
Oh yeah.
If you see me on there, just feel free to laugh, and that's.
Did you have to, like, sign a non-disclosure? I mean, a non-disparagement thing in your contract?
I'm pretty sure that was a part of
Yeah.
I'll have to go back and look at that.
Because otherwise I'd be like, you should come on and talk about it. We that would be it's fun. I mean, it's kind of a fun. It's not very serious.
I think it sounds like just what I need to see, actually,
Yeah.
because there is there is a real story to it. It has nothing to do with extraterrestrials, but you've got a group of people that have gone on for 25 seasons now,
Yes.
30 seasons, and made, quite a bit of money and tour, and it is the good old bros club out on tour there. So
we actually ended up interviewing Jonathan Young, who is oh man, why am I forgetting all the names now? He's the guy who is a expert in the guy who wrote The Golden Bough. Anyway, you can just cut that out. Never mind. We can move on from that.
there's so much to that, and that's kind of one of those things. There's so many things with the whole topic that I have a limited attention span for stuff, especially the more I learn and the more I'm like, okay, this is kind of nuts.
I kind of feel like it's interesting as like sort of this like group created sort of alternative history. Like if somebody just like packaged it up and like had a 900-page book that was just, like Holy Blood, Holy Grail, or some of these other sort of conspiracist history type things. Like I think it would be like an amusing thing to read. But the fact that people watch it are like, it could be true. Our like genetic our genetics may be affected by aliens who showed up in Mesopotamia, and the temples are shaped that way because there's actually spaceships. It's like, all right, whatever.
Yeah, that was the thing. You definitely, I have people that I know that are, world-class engineers. People that are the most logically based people on the planet. They're like, oh yeah, did you see that episode? And they're like totally digging it and going down that, thing. And I'm just, okay, no, we got to get back to reality here, because like you said, people have shaped a whole narrative around things, and they're things that I definitely have learned are not based in fact at all. So
no.
Well, yeah, like that's what makes history interesting, is how it's presented. And as both of you are well aware, you have to frame your presentation of something in some way. Like in anything that we document or report on, we have to somewhat choose what the most important parts are, because you can't just present to somebody 60 minutes of every hour, 24 hours a day over the course of what may be years of a story. So then, in my opinion, what becomes really important is the source material. Like, where did you get the, like, if we don't quote the source material, or at least provide it for people to go look at themselves, then every historian is just telling a story,
Right.
And then it just all ends up hearsay. Everything's just hearsay then. So, and that's what I think I kind of see as some of the UFO quote unquote documentation is, people really want to believe some things, and that's what they'll see in them. And even people that view themselves like their self-image is of an objective documentarian or an archivist or a researcher, but they're still working towards a preconceived conclusion. And so we have to provide those source material so someone else can see where you're coloring between the lines and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of feel like, do you know cargo cults?
Yeah.
Have you read about cargo cults with just if people who are listening haven't? It's like these tiny islands in the Pacific where during World War II, there'd be a U.S. air base, or there'd be people, with, lookout sites or whatever. But so these people who just didn't have much, the people who lived on the island who never had much interaction with people from the outside would see these guys in uniforms, and they had radios, and then people would like drop out of planes, would drop like crates full of food that would come down. And so it all just seemed kind of magical. And then when they left, the people who remained were started to act the way that these US military guys were. So they would march around, and they'd have like these fake radios that they pretend to talk into and stuff. And the idea, I guess, being that, you do these things, then maybe something will drop out of the sky that you can eat. And I feel like there's like this sort of UFO cargo cult science kind of, where you go through these actions that seem like you're doing science, but in fact isn't really science. It's just sort of looks like science. And I think particularly about going back to what I was talking about before about the proceedings from the MIT conference, and when actual scientists were looking at what was supposedly the science behind looking to UFO abductions, they're like, yeah, this isn't science. Like, what you're doing has nothing to do with science. You're just doing something completely different and calling it science. And I don't know if that's an exact, like in that particular situation, I feel like that's a really good metaphor. For things like these, like those different those videos that To the Stars Academy put out with a gimbal and go fast and all that stuff. Again, it's like when you talk to people who actually know what they're talking about, it's not that mysterious. But if you're not actually using scientific rigor, dog, it does, it can seem, and it's the same thing with Ancient Aliens. Like if you don't have knowledge or are not willing to look for knowledge outside of the little package that you're given on your TV, then yeah, it seems pretty compelling. But generally, if you just Google it and you read the Wikipedia page for whatever they happen to be talking about, it's like, oh, actually, everybody knows what that is.
Yes. I was actually interested enough in this stuff, Toby, that after I'd read one of those paperbacks in the 1990s, I started contacting the people that were in them. And I was going to the UFO conferences, and I wanted to ask people the questions that seemed to be glaringly omitted from some of these paperbacks and these presentations. And I would repeatedly have people telling me, yeah, I think he kind of took some creative license there. That's not exactly what I described to him. And actually, I had the opportunity to meet Bud Hopkins at a UFO conference in the early 1990s, and it significantly started shifting my perspective. That he did not, this man that seemed so charismatic and comfortable on stage seemed like a cat in a corner when people were talking to him one-on-one after his presentation. Like he was restless and just wanted to get away from them and wanted to get out of there. And those kinds of things made me like, like I say, I would ask the subjects of these books, people in these books, I went to MUFON meetings. I was meeting people at meetings, and they often seemed completely not curious about finding answers as composed to just repeatedly telling stories. And like another thing I'd like to touch on, please, is you had mentioned that there was criticism from the academic community about the MIT UFO abduction conference. And it's not just resistance to what UFO researchers present. I'd like to point out, I did a fairly deep dive on one of those surveys, some of that Bigelow funded, that Jacobs and Hopkins and Westrom had Roper distribute and ask people where they inadvisedly concluded that millions of Americans had been abducted by UFOs without ever asking the question. They made that conclusion. And I read the remarks from actual experts on creating surveys and designing surveys, and they go point by point about what's wrong with it and why and how it's misleading and how people will be misled. And one of these I got in touch with was a professor at Rutgers. I believe, if I recall correctly, his name was Ted Gortzel, I think was his last name. And he had written that they had successfully created a survey to measure things, but it was false memories was what they were measuring, that they were creating themselves to a certain extent, and that, like, you're telling people what you want them to feed back to you. And yeah, but my point being, it's not just that scientists and statisticians and survey experts said, no, we don't accept this. They explained point by point and cited previous research and precedents of like one of the things I remember some British researchers pointed out was one of the questions was what's called a double-barreled question. And they said experts that are acting in good faith know not to do that, because it's just known in the industry that you get more positive responses to double-barreled questions than if you ask each question singularly. And by double-barrel question, I mean, like, did you start the car and go to the store? Or did you start the car? Did you go to the store? Like, you'll get different answers if you ask. And yeah, the sociologists and survey experts pointed these things out, that this survey was just riddled with things that got more false positives than would have been the case if designed competently. Is just one of the many, other things to consider around all this.
Yeah, I just remember thinking, because one of the places I worked at, like, a lot of what they did was to send out surveys, like these huge surveys, and you need qualified people making them. You need qualified people editing them, looking them over, doing some testing on them. I mean, it's not something you just whip up a bunch of questions you think are going to be interesting and send it out to people and have it be scientifically valid. And so when they're, there's a video, I think it's of after the actual conference, there's like a sort of roundtable thing, and somebody's saying, like, if you could have come to talk to somebody about like how to actually make a valid survey, you know, that would have been really helpful. But I was just like, oh, this is exactly what we're looking for when we talked to, like, why didn't you talk to somebody who knew what they were doing before you sent this thing out? You know, I mean, it can't be that hard. David Jacobs works at Temple University. They probably have a couple people who know how to make a survey, or at least tell you, at least tell you that the one that you've made doesn't work. So, yeah, I'm not telling anybody anything, but I do think that, you know, the whole sort of UFO industry, like when you're starting with the idea that UFOs exist and that there's been a cover up and all this stuff, is like, if that's what's driving you, like your conclusion's already there, like without taking a look at the evidence. So and at that point, it's like, what does the scientific method have to do with anything? Because it's always going to end up, yeah, UFOs are real. Yeah, people are being abducted or whatever.
And that's why, and it's interesting because now more than ever, you see a big push, an anti-science push, like pushing people to conspiracy theories, and then, you know, into questioning science and the validity of all these things that we've learned. It's really quite fascinating. But
yeah, as long as you don't get the measles or, you know, whatever.
Well, apparently that's coming.
Yeah.
First few cases here in Utah, so good luck and God save the Queen. But so Toby, since we're getting ready to wrap up, like what have been some of the most fascinating things, and maybe fascinating and disturbing things that you've learned going through doing all the research that you've learned about this topic?
It's interesting. I mean, it doesn't get much more disturbing than Emma Woods, to be quite honest. I think that was really the thing that stood out as, you know, just a complete disaster. I don't, you know, I just, it's so, I guess it's just the scope of it, both in terms of sort of breadth of, people who are doing stuff on it, you know, in both sort of skeptical and, you know, believer, and also in sort of the, you know, it's been going on for about 100 years, right? And just the fact that there are certain things that I feel have been sort of accepted at this point for no other reason than they've just been around for a long time. Like I was talking to Ralph Blumenthal, who's that New York Times reporter who with Leslie Kean, which it still blows my mind that Leslie Kean is actually writing stuff about UFOs for the New York Times. Seems just can't wrap my head around it. But anyway, he's a very nice, very smart guy, fully in on UFOs. But when I was talking to him, I was like, well, what, you know, what do you think are the best cases? Like if you were to say like, this is what you should look at. And he mentioned Betty and Barney Hill. And I was like, well, clearly you've never listened to my podcast because I covered that earlier. You know where I stand on that stuff. But B, it's like, you know, that happened in 1961, right? I mean, so the best thing that you can think of right now as a smart guy who's fully in on this stuff is something that happened 60 years ago, and for which there isn't any evidence. Like you're basically relying on regression hypnosis, which has been pretty much shown to not be true. You know, Lonnie Zamora, the whole swamp gas thing, which, you know, in the end turns out not to be like that outlandish an explanation. It just sounds stupid if you don't know what swamp gas is. You know, it feels like there's been this accumulation of stuff that hasn't been fully examined that has sort of created this sort of core of just sort of stories, but are given some kind of, you know, truthfulness or, I don't know, legitimacy, just purely because They've been around for a long time. There hasn't been, I mean, you can still read about them without having somebody sort of have a rebuttal to it. And so you can do, if you're selective in what you're looking at, I mean, I think you can sort of bring yourself into this mindset that like this stuff has been happening for a long time. I don't know why more people aren't talking about it. So I think that's, I guess I didn't realize when I was getting into it, like I'd been kind of into UFOs when I was a kid. And, even like after I graduated from college, like I had a roommate, he'd go out and go to the Blockbuster and get a bunch of In Search Of like videotapes. We'd like sit around, drink beers and watch In Search Of and have a good laugh and stuff. But I guess I didn't quite realize just the mass of stuff that's out there. And then like how it's evolved now, to where it really seems like it's this really the journey we've made from like the 50s with like the contactees, like running into like groovy aliens from Venus who are like have long blonde hair and are wearing these like flowing white clothes and stuff, to now
You gotta love
like
the Nordics. They're great.
yeah,
Aren't they?
exactly. Yeah. And now it's just like, these weird little blips that we see on these these like heat sensing cameras from planes and stuff. It feels like it's gone from being this sort of human type of story, like people interacting with things, to now it's just this really sort of technological thing where you look at like these weird sort of uninterpretable by a layman little things like going across, looks like a little black dot going across water. And that's like this really compelling thing. That seems like a weird journey to me too. I guess in the end, it's just sort of like these different eras seem to be reflective of where we are in some ways as a society. There's always that joke about like how like the UFOs footage is always about as good as our special effects are at any given time. But it also feels like the way that sort of UFOs are looked at, or what seemed as sort of legitimate, is also kind of reflective of where our society is at the time. So I mean, that's sort of off the top of my head, sort of rambling, but those are kind of things I think about now when I think about UFOs, and I talk to my friends about stuff like that.
I mean, it's fascinating because it's like, and history repeats. I mean, we see that in real life. History repeats. Nobody learns a lesson from anything. But now there was a contact in the desert recently, and it was very interesting to see little blurbs of people. A reporter from CNN did an interview with some of the people that were speaking and some of the people that were there at the conference, and it's fully like they are all into the blonde-haired, blue-eyed.
Oh, really?
They are back on it, and I find that really funny. It's like, wow, the Nordics. You've got the ugly little gray aliens, that are terrible, and the benevolent space brothers are, Nordic. I mean, what really, we haven't talked about any race. I mean,
yeah,
any kind of neo-Nazi kind of theme with any of this stuff is very interesting to me. But I think we're going back to that route again. And then you always throw in the angels and demons, and at the end of the day, it's like it's crazy. It's fascinating. It's insane. And it's definitely good to be skeptical and have both feet on the ground like you have done.
Well, I can't, like, the two of you are just in the middle of it, like, all the time, it seems. And it does, like, trying to, like, maintain, like, rationality and sort of rigor of thought when what's swirling around is just so nuts in so many ways. I mean, that was kind of towards the end. I was like, I don't know, like, I just feel like I'm spending a lot of my mental energy thinking about stuff that's just completely like bizarre and just is just clearly like not true. And like trying to make sense of what that means. Like, it's not even like trying to debunk it, but what does it mean that people believe in this stuff? And I've got a friend who's like, I believe in UFOs, but it feels like a, it's like a low, that's going to be harmed by my belief in UFOs. It's not like I believe in something that there's not a whole lot of stakes as to whether I believe in UFOs or not. And she's like, it's like you like rooting for the Washington Wizards. Like, they lose all the time, but you have some emotional investment in it, but it's not the end of the world for you. And it felt the same way about UFOs. And I was like, well, yeah, but do you like care about, like, I realize that it's irrational to root for the worst basketball team in the league year after year after year and expect them to do better. But like, doesn't it feel weird to like sort of believe in something that seems sort of, if you look at it with any kind of rigor, isn't real? But she's like, people believe a lot of stuff that's not real. And this is a low impact one for her.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's a gateway. I look at, like, in the conspiracies, the JFK, I mean, all of these 9/11 truthers and, and UFOs. I mean, it's a gateway to hell, really. I mean, it's just like, and you either, I mean, I've got people that I know and friends that, that's really interesting. How can we be alone in the universe? And of course, I mean, that would make sense, but it certainly is not what we've been presented with. All of these stories, all of these, seeded by people who are either mentally unstable or who have an agenda. It can definitely lead people down a really dark rabbit hole, unfortunately.
We could have started with this, and I could talk to you guys for a couple hours just about this stuff, like talking with Richard Doty and, the guys who did the X-Files and stuff. I mean, I think that's just like a whole nother conversation, which I think is really interesting, which is sort of around when I was looking at the folklore stuff. But
well, that means you have to come back then.
Well, yeah. I'm happy to do it anytime. This is fun to just get to chat about this stuff.
Absolutely is interesting. I share Erica's concern there about a gateway of people that manipulate the topic in order to attract people that are distrusting of authority figures. Like, we did a deep dive at Expanding Frontiers on people that promote UFO stories while simultaneously promoting risky financial investments. And there's a long history of it. It's not like it just happened a couple years ago. There's a long history of it. So and then you've got the intelligence community aspects of it, and it's a whole thing that it does come down like you have tried to explore, like from a humanitarian perspective of what's happening with people in this process is, I think, a big part of the story. I've seen Erica approach it that way too.
Yeah. Well, luckily for you, Toby, you haven't been down the rabbit holes I've been down, and you've handled, I really love, this is, honestly, to me, this is one of my favorite interviews that I've ever done. So I just want to thank you.
Oh, good. Oh yeah. No, this is super fun.
Really stoked. It's refreshing. I have to have the conversations with Jack all the time. It's like, what am I doing even dealing with this anymore? Because it is just, God. Seriously, Jack and I have to check in. Okay, buddy, are we going to go out and walk on the grass and, just do some things that are nourishing us, get my painting out. Jack goes, it's just important to stay grounded when you get into the thick of things. And I really recommend that people don't get involved with this subject, unless you're looking at it from, the perspective that you're providing to people. It's not a healthy subject. So
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, it's like the meta stuff is really, I guess, is sort of the interesting. It's not necessarily the actual facts, quote unquote facts, but it's like, how did we get there?
right.
But the unfortunate thing is for you guys is that if you're not doing it, is anybody going to do it? I mean, you're doing the tough work that people shy away from.
Thank you. Yeah, we need to hear that because, again, like I said, Jack and I just, oh my Lord, what's going on? And I'm grateful for finding Jack and being a partner with Jack on research, because we've kind of shored each other up, in a lot of ways, in a subject with people that are not necessarily the kindest of souls. So I appreciate that. And I'm excited to hear about the new show and your time on the set and all of these things. And please come back like sooner than later.
Yeah, just let me know. Yeah, this is fun. I do this whenever.
Okay. Well, I'll take you up on that.
All right. Sounds good. Sounds good.
Yeah, thank you so much. And so please tell everybody where we can find you, what the best place to find you and listen to everything.
So social media, I'm on Blue Sky at Toby Ball NH. And I'm on Crime Writers On, which is the true crime review thing, on Mondays and Thursdays. More Like Ancient Phalians drops on Fridays. And if you want to check out stuff that I've done in the past, Strange Arrivals is the UFO thing I did 3, I think 12 episode seasons. And then I did one, sorry, I'm just getting all allergic all of a sudden. I did a podcast about the only 2 women we know of who have tried to assassinate a U.S. president. And they happened 17 days apart in 1975.
Oh.
One of them was a follower of Charles Manson, and the other was a 45-year-old divorced housewife who ended up being an underground informant on the radical scene in San Francisco for the FBI up until the day she took the shot. So that's called Rip Current.
Ooh. Okay, I know what I'm doing later tonight. Then this sounds really fascinating. Wow.
That was definitely a fun one to do. I'm working on season 2 for that right now.
Oh, how cool. Sounds like you really are doing some fun things and just the diversity, I love it. So,
yeah. I was a history major, so I was like, I got to do history podcasts at some point. And, the 70s are that little blind spot for me when I was like, I was born in 1967. So like the 70s are that little period where, you're not watching the news but you hear like stuff that your parents say and it sort of sticks with you. And then you get to be 50 and it's like, what was that all about? So that was kind of led me down that rabbit hole.
How fun. I like it. Well, I will put your links to all of your work in the show description, but thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. You really I'm going to have a great weekend because of this wonderful conversation.
Good.
Good.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us, Toby. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Jack. And thank you for being on Strange Arrivals and all the work both of you guys do. Yeah. I mean, you're swimming against a large diluted tide. I feel like.
You ain't kidding.
Thank you.
Thank for therapy. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
But thank you guys. And thank you everyone to all of our show supporters and people that support Expanding Frontiers Research. You can check it out at expandingfrontiersresearch.org. And we will catch you next time. Stay safe and we will catch you then. Bye. Bye guys.